Welcome, everybody. My name is Matthew Caruso, and I am a Director of Corporate Communications at KPMG in the U.S. And welcome to our first Twitter Space. This is a platform that we aim to use more so you can hear directly from our leaders and experts as they discuss trends in the marketplace. And today, we have KPMG's National Sector Leader for Technology, Media, and Telecom, Mark Gibson, joining us to discuss the surge in digital transformation. So welcome, Mark, and why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Hey, Matt, thanks for that introduction. It's great to be here, and I'm really excited to be the first guest on the new platform. I've had a long career in professional business. I've been at KPMG quite a while and really have been in all aspects of our business, audit, advisory, helping out with our tax practice as well, but always a focus on tech and the TMT sector. I'm based up in Seattle, spend a lot of my time on the West Coast, and really excited to be with you today. Look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, and are you from Seattle originally, or are you?
I am, Matt. I went to college here at the University of Washington, and have had one foot in this part of the country my whole career. So
good,
exciting.
So I'm going to test your knowledge of the Pacific Northwest a little bit as a result of this, because one of my friends once told me this, and I found. So here's my question for you: before they made it big, which grunge rock band originally named themselves after Seattle Supersonics guard Mookie Blaylock?
Oh boy, I know this one. I think it's Pearl Jam, if I'm not mistaken.
You got it. They did.
Yes.
They did 10 shows with Alice in Chains with the name Mookie Blaylock, and my friend from college told me he saw one of those shows. So it's a little factoid that's always stuck with me.
Yeah, it's funny. I graduated from the University of Washington in 1990, just before the grunge scene hit. So I was a young fledgling accounting worker, punching the clock long hours during the grunge scene. So
Nice.
Not sure I was as active as I might have been if it had been a few years earlier.
Yeah. So, besides keeping tabs on what goes on in the tech sector, since we're on Twitter and we're doing a Twitter space here, what do you like to follow? Who are some of the people that you follow on Twitter, subjects?
Yeah, it's Matt. It's amazing how Twitter has become the news source. I mean, it's where I get a lot of my news. It tends to be where I find myself surfing when I'm on those Zoom calls that are going on and on and on. You got your phone right next to you, and you can't resist the urge to take a look. I certainly follow all of my Seattle sports teams on there, and I spent the morning University of Washington struggling this year on the football field from our coaches today. I got all that news from Twitter, so get all my sports there. Like following the Fortune, the writers there. I find them to be really good on Twitter for getting the business news in particular. But just about all of the major news outlets certainly get from there as well. The other one I really love is the Eurasia Group. Ian Bremmer and his colleagues there. Kevin Allison does a great job on the tech side with Eurasia Group. I think that's a really informative geopolitical group that I get a lot of news from on Twitter as well. So try to be varied. Try to keep the number of followers down as few as I can, so that the stuff that hits the feed is relevant.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And Eurasia Group, that's certainly a great group. They're always looking at the trends, as it relates to things like digital transformation. And we recently did a pretty extensive study in the 2021 U.S. CEO Outlook that focused a great deal on digital transformation. And one of the key findings was just how the pace of digital transformation continues to accelerate. Can you tell the listeners how aggressively are CEOs investing in digital transformation and why?
Yeah, it's a great question. The pace of investment is unlike anything I've seen in my 30-year career as well. I was talking to a colleague this morning about sort of remembering the Kodak moment when film got replaced by digital media, and that phrase Kodak moment. Those types of things are happening on a daily and a weekly basis now with the pace of transformation. And what we've seen over the last 9 to 12 months, the pandemic has only accelerated that even further. Just a huge, significant uptick in digital transformation investments aboard pre-IPO companies, mid-market companies, large tech companies, all leaning into that transformation effort. And some of them are doing it for different reasons. I think there's a lot of companies out there that have sort of significant deferred maintenance with their technology, the tech debt, so to speak, where they're trying to jump forward, get back to a modern platform. Others are doing it for scalability reasons, transforming their end-to-end operating models, those types of things, a little more proactively doing that. Others are trying to transform to really inject high-end process automation, robotics, large-scale data modernization projects, for example, where they've got just massive amounts of rich enterprise data, and they're trying to transform their business end to end to take advantage of that data well. So,
Hmm.
like you mentioned on the survey, I mean, the CEOs are clearly indicating that they're feeling like they need in the organizations digitally to build capabilities to be on the offensive. And,
Right.
we're seeing just massive change in how they how they interact with their customers, how they retain their customers through smarter customer 360-degree views, self-service technology platforms that are all digitized as well. And so it's a remarkable velocity out there right now.
Yeah, one of the things that we found in the survey is that they when it came to U.S. tech CEOs, they consider themselves kind of at the vanguard, ahead of the curve. A lot of them felt that they consider themselves well prepared for a future cyber attack. From what you're discussing with clients, what are the steps that companies are taking to further bolster their cybersecurity efforts?
Yeah, it was really interesting finding, Matt. It's a good question. It's a complex question, if I'm honest, because I think a lot of us who practice day to day have a real question of whether the tech companies in particular, are as prepared or well prepared cyber attack as they might have indicated in those surveys. Because another question in that same survey, we asked CEOs to sort of risk rank the various business risks they face, and
Mhm.
for years, cyber was sort of towards the end of the top 10. It was always on the list for tech CEOs. In 2021, on the survey, cyber went to number one, passed
Wow.
all of the other risks on the entire survey, and was the number one risk that keeps tech CEOs up at night. So, interesting dichotomy to say that they believe they're well prepared, but they also view it as the number one risk they face. And with the majority of their products and services now available on the cloud or in the internet, I think it makes sense that the tech companies have sort of ranked cyber at the top of their list of areas to watch for.
Mhm.
I think a lot of tech companies, they're really leaning into their cyber response, and that might lead to some of that survey data as well. They're investing in cybersecurity skill workforce, investing in software, investing in infrastructure, having defense teams and hit squads ready to go in the event of a cyber attack, and trying to build an organization where it's part of the DNA. They've got deep skills and talent, but it's really, really hard. It's really hard to prepare and prevent it happening. That we see this huge rise in ransomware attacks. I think they're soon going to be becoming the norm in business, unfortunately.
Wow.
And protecting your enterprise, it's got to happen both internally and externally. And I think a lot of times companies are investing in all of their talent and resources, but what they end up saying is, "Hey, I wish we had invested more in employee education against phishing or cyber scams or those types of things," because so many of these attacks that we see at some internal weak point or some employee that clicks on something, that's where it originates from, as much and as often as some major external threat that you needed software and infrastructure to guard against. So it really is up and down the stack for sure.
Again, I'm talking to KPMG's National Sector Leader for Technology and Telecom, Mark Gibson. And Mark, maybe one of the key threats or the key things that are keeping tech CEOs up at night these days is the supply chain challenges. You read a lot in the news in terms of like the chip shortages. What's the latest that you're hearing from clients?
Yeah, it's a great question as well, and it's so tied into this topic of digital transformation and the end to end processes that companies trying to digitize and transform, because we've seen with COVID in particular the disruptions in the supply chain and how dramatic those can be. The impact of a problem in your partner channel and the debilitating impact that can have on the business. And I think a lot of companies, tech companies in particular, face this challenge when they saw channel partners either have difficulty getting product to the U.S., and we've seen that. Supply shortage in manufacturing shutdown happened early in the pandemic, and the ability to ramp that back up has been really problematic. And then just the number of companies and suppliers out there within the supply chain that are having cash flow issues, particularly again during the early stages of COVID. And so managing and helping the health of your partner ecosystem and your supply chain has become really, really important for tech companies and really critical to the success of businesses. And we have seen some of the big tech companies be really, really good at in their partner and supplier ecosystems, helping them enable the capabilities to help digitize end-to-end operations, not just within their own company, but through their supply chains and with their partners. And I think as we see these acceleration of, as a service, X as a service business models, I think it's imperative that all tech CEOs think about their partner and customer ecosystems as integral to their business and integral to their transformation efforts around this topic.
Yeah, but we've kind of talked a little bit about playing defense, right? When it comes to some of the threats that they face. But let's talk a little bit about how the tech sector in particular is playing offense. From the CEO outlook, we found that almost 3/4 of U.S. tech CEOs said that their organization is actively disrupting the sector in which they operate. So maybe you could share some of the ways that tech companies are taking advantage of digital disruption.
Yeah, Matt, just think about the way, how in the world did we make it through pandemic? And it's so heavily because of the investments and this disruption from these tech companies. Think about how you buy clothes these days and the retail tech companies that have sort of disrupted retail clothing industry through, their online operations, but also their, monthly subscriptions to a box of clothes that you receive every month and those types of things, disrupting the way we buy clothes. Think about the way you book a trip,
Mhm.
a hotel or a flight these days, and how those companies have disrupted hospitality. Think about the way you get a ride somewhere and the way the ride sharing companies have disrupted that entire sector. Think about the payment businesses. How many times that you get on an app on your phone and you make a payment either to your brother or your friend or for a major purchase in your life where you're making that payment on your phone through a payment processor that's disrupted.
Yep.
Fintech is a huge disruption. But then even things like the way we do education. I was just looking at my CPE report that I have to keep my continuing education to keep my CPAs up, and I have not had a single in-person class in the last 18 months. Yet I've got all the CPE credit that I've ever needed because he has built an online education platform. So disrupting the sector as well. Those are tech companies doing that, and I think those same disruptors are investing in their platforms, and they've heavily invested in their core, and they've sort of scaled themselves ahead of their competitors, investing in their operations, digitizing their end solution, back office, all the way through customer experience. And the ones that have leaned into that and got it right, I think, are the ones who are really becoming the tech disruptors that are such a part of our daily life days. But many of those companies didn't even exist a
Mhm.
few short years ago.
Yeah. So again, we're talking to Mark Gibson. He's the national sector leader for technology, media, and telecom. And so you've given a good example as to what sectors you've been seeing a good deal of investment. Who's lagging behind in all of this? What are some of the sectors that really need to catch up as a result of everything?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because it's certainly not a one size fits all. Most of the subsectors within tech, we have seen making investment in digital transformation, and I think the ones that are the clear leaders, a lot of the big software companies, certainly the fintech companies and the platform companies, seem like they're pretty far ahead in their strategic investments in these areas. Some of the older tech that we've seen, some of the hardware companies, maybe the semiconductors, some of the more traditional e-commerce entities out there, I think, need to play catch up to some degree. So it's not the same across the board. I think the ability to make that investment is a good step towards being the disruptor that we talked about a little bit previously. But in broad general terms, I'd say those are the subsectors that I see as being somewhat ahead and the ones that may need to be playing a little bit of catch up as we go forward.
Yep. Yep. So a few minutes ago, you had mentioned the importance as we were talking about cybersecurity and supply chains, supply lines in terms of companies and really formulating really strong alliances as they can create different access to emerging technologies and other industries and clients and their various innovative business platforms. What are the types of disruptive technologies and other priorities are driving this increased interest in alliances?
Yeah, I think the alliances is a real key part to success here on digitally transforming your business, being the disruptor that we talked about, being the customer focused. I think a lot of the companies we're seeing in the tech space are figuring out what they do well and what they do best, and then trying to decide whether they need to be end to end all steps or whether an alliance or a partnership strategically with another entity might make the most sense. So we're seeing a lot of emerging tech alliances and strategic partnerships around things like blockchain, around things like AI, robotics, cloud, even cyber to some degree that we talked about earlier, that we're seeing a lot of companies have alliances with partners in those spaces to help cover those risks as part of the end-to-end solution. And I think the software companies have maybe been doing this for quite a while. A lot of the big software companies have found maybe they inject their software program with an alliance on RPA, for example, or something around cyber or something around data. I mean, data is another piece of this. I think we meant early on this conversation. We haven't circled back much to data, but I believe the next transformation is once this sort of deferred maintenance is caught up and everybody's become more modern in their end-to-end solution. It's going to become who can take advantage of just the massive amount of data that is out there and leverage that data capability. And I think a lot of companies are looking at alliances as a possible way to really take advantage of the data imperative that is out there now. And I know it's a topic that in my role, leading the tech sector in the US and working with my peers at KPMG around the globe, that we're leaning heavily into. What is the data imperative and what is going to happen with all of the data that exists out there? So again, I think it's a great way to think about transforming the experience, potentially building a partner network through alliances, through enhancing your supply chain. And I think sort of tying together a lot of the things we've been talking about today, Matt.
Yep. Well, we're going to open up some lines for people to ask questions. Essentially, if you're listening to this, you can request permission to speak by tapping on the request icon below the microphone, and we'll click on you to ask any questions to Mark if anybody has any questions. While we're waiting for some, I know, Mark, that you're somebody who hosts podcasts. You've got a great podcast called Tech And, where you talk with other leaders in the firm, and you discuss a number of digital trends. Any new podcasts coming down the pike? Or
yeah, it's the timing couldn't be better, Matt, and it's probably not just a coincidence, but we actually are releasing the next episode of the Tech And podcast. It's all about cyber. I have a great conversation with one of our partners, Vijay Jaju, who works down in the Silicon Valley, and we have a really interesting conversation around really going a lot deeper on this cyber risk topic that we touched briefly on before. And then just this morning, we recorded the episode that'll follow that. And it's a really deep dive on the same subject that we're talking about today around digital transformation with Peter Mercheka, who runs our TMT practice for our consulting practice here in the US. Great guy and a really good thought leader around digital transformation. So I think it would be a good compliment when that comes out here in the near term.
Yeah.
To listen to that in conjunction with the conversation we're having today to get a real broad view. But we've done some great stuff. We've talked about tech and sports, tech and finance, tech and cyber, tech and ESG, and I think the linkage between technology being not just a vertical in the world, but a horizontal, as I like to call it, touching across every industry sector. That at some point here, we're not going to be able to call technology a sector anymore. It's going to be just part of every other sector, and I think that's what that podcast is leaning into somewhat.
It's great. Well, I know that, first, I encourage everybody to check them out. I know that you post a lot of them on either, your Twitter and LinkedIn pages. So why don't you tell people how they can follow you on social media?
Yeah, great. So I would say Twitter and LinkedIn are the best place. You've obviously found me on Twitter if you're here as well, but easy to find me on LinkedIn as well. Mark Gibson at TMT. Most of the links to the things like the podcast and the conversations we're having here, we'll post there as well. The podcast is actually available sort of anywhere you'd find your podcast, Apple Podcasts or Google or whatever the source of your podcasts are. If you search Tech and 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 my name, you can find that series as well. We probably have released 10 or 12 so far, and we put out 1 or 2 a month on that. So good to go back and take a listen to some of those.
Absolutely, will do. Well, thanks for a great conversation, Mark, and really appreciate your time. And stay tuned for more great conversations that we're going to have on this channel coming up in coming weeks and months. And be sure to listen to Mark's Tech And podcast. Thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Thanks for the chance to be your guest today.
You got it.
All right, take care. Everyone.
Bye-bye.